Okay. This morning, I have the privilege of speaking with Paul Kowalski. He is the writer and director for Paper Tiger. Wow, what a film!
Thank you so much. Thanks for having me, by the way. It's
No,
great to be here.
thank you for spending some time with me because there's just so much I want to talk to you about this film. Uh, Very impactful. I will say it's very few films where I see something coming and then the act happened and I jumped.
Mm.
And I did, and I caught myself, said, "Oh, whew, all right." I did not expect to have a physical reaction to it, especially after that journey that you put us through. You want to tell us a little bit about the film?
Sure. So this is a film that it's a very personal film to me. It's obviously inspired a lot by mental health concerns and friends I've had over the years who've been touched by mental illness. And it's also kind of inspired by a news story I read while I was at the American Film Institute, sort of about a mum who, an immigrant mother who has a son who she thinks is going to, potentially turn into a school shooter. So I just got fascinated by that whole dynamic, and I did a lot of research on school shooters, and also I'm an immigrant in America, and a lot of it is kind of that first and second generation immigrant conflict between the mother and the son in my story, and those are all things that are sort of very personal to me. But I also was very conscious about trying to make a film that was sort of a little bit elevated and had the different POVs. So when you switch between the mother's POV and the son's POV, you get two very different subjectivities. And I think ultimately, it's a mother-son story, but with the cinematography and the sort of slightly stylized nature of the film, hopefully it's also a compelling, kind of entertaining film, if one could say that about a film, with those themes. And obviously, I'm trying not to give away the ending here that you're alluding to, because I don't want to do a spoiler, but I appreciate you saying that.
Yeah, what I see, I'm second generation. My parents came from Mexico and El Salvador, respectively, met here, and then made their lives here, and then thus my brothers and I came to be quote unquote Americans. And so what was really interesting to me was something that I grew up seeing from my family and my unit, and then other uncles, aunts, and just friends and family, is how tight and how important everybody's role is. Mom, dad, brother, sister, aunt, uncle, whoever lives with you, and how taking away any piece of that, it can be so destructive and very traumatic, because you really only rely on yourselves really to make it work, because of certain handicaps. Maybe somebody doesn't have papers, maybe somebody's in the process, restrictions and things like that, language barriers. So in this film with Edward and Lily, they've lost the head of the house, the dad, and we just see kind of what happens, the aftermath, and I don't think we see that enough.
Totally. I think you're spot on. I mean, there's a reason that's the catalyst, right, for the film. The inciting incident is the death of Edward's father and Lily's husband, and it sort of leaves a huge hole in the family. And honestly, Emmanuel, you're picking up on points here that I was, conscious of throughout, where you have these two different characters who ostensibly are so different, right? But a mother who's much more ingrained in her traditional roots. You have a son who's basically Americanized and is in high school, has different kinds of concerns of fitting in school. But ultimately, for me, the whole time I was writing it and on set and even editing it, it became clear to me that they're very similar. They're almost like the same kind of person in a sense. They both have the same issues, and the biggest conflict, the monster in this film, is really just a lack of communication, and opening up. And that, in the least common denominator, is something that I hope comes across to people, because it's a tragedy. The film is a tragedy in line with, Greek tragedies, and it's very cathartic at the end. It may seem bleak, but it's also supposed to be a bit of a call to arms, saying that this is what can happen if we don't communicate, we don't talk. She's afflicted with loneliness, he's afflicted with mental health. There's the stigma of taking medicine and not, publicizing it, and not, reaching out to help when you're struggling and you're alone. And hopefully that comes through in that the path both of these characters took was unfortunately the one that led them to tragedy, And I think there's something, yes, absolutely, being an immigrant myself. My parents are Polish. I was born in London, but I grew up actually in Saudi Arabia, in Libya, in Algeria, in the Philippines, in Cyprus, all over the world. So I'm completely messed up in terms of identity. But everywhere we went, we were always, like you said, the family unit, because you feel different outside. So you stick to your family, and that's everything. And what happens with an immigrant, family when it starts to break apart? Who do you have to lean on? Right. So you're picking up on things that hopefully other people will pick up on, regardless, where they're from and who they are. But I think they're kind of universal issues of the need for family, community, and communication as the big themes in the film.
Yeah, I 100% agree. With the other thing also, you mentioned a little bit on it, is tradition versus really, and how that holds a grip sometimes on a family, because they don't believe in certain medicines. I know that's been an argument sometimes in my family.
Totally.
Do it this way, and it's like, no, don't put those chemicals in your body. Scientists don't know anything. This is the way we've done it for hundreds of years. And then
which is very much in the news today with science and medicine, right? Vaccines and all that. Yeah. We won't get into that.
No, that is a spicy topic, regardless of which way you're for it. And then just, I think also hiding your ailments and trying to pretend that you're stronger than you are is such a big theme. Also, I know it is in our culture, and it's interesting to see it that it also jumps to other cultures, and like you said, how important it is to talk to one another about what we're feeling, what we're seeing, and what that can save us from, right?
Totally. I mean, a lot of it's, resilience and excuse me, and pride is huge. It's about being proud, and again, it comes down to communicating. And I think that's, at the end of the film, hopefully the audience turn to each other and have a little chat and start talking and opening up. That would be a great thing to stimulate that kind of a dialogue. And I think, honestly, man, I think in America especially, I think we need that right now. It's like you're either here or you're here. There's no middle ground. You know what I mean? And that can't be the way forward. It never has been. It never will be. So even on a much more broad level, forgetting about the specific themes of Paper Tiger, I think it's a good example of how we could heal as a nation. It's just speaking, talking, communicating. I see that a lot today on social media, in the news, neighbor to neighbor. You know what I mean? It's a sickness in itself.
I agree. And you did this organically with a story about a mom and a son. What I really enjoyed about it is I didn't feel at any point you were forcing anything at me. It was just, this is Edward. This is what he's dealing with today. And at the same time, we're looking at Lily. I call them dueling protagonists, because I kept going back and forth. I love
that. Yeah,
it was really good. Their experiences are obviously intertwined as the mother and son who's trying to just make it. Exactly. But nothing was forced. Everything I want to talk about in the film was just part of their experience.
I think you bring up a good point, and it's something that when I was starting out writing just back in the day, characters would tend to be a bit black and white, and I think as I understood, the depth of characters and just got older, you realize that everyone is kind of the hero of their own story in life, and everyone is living in a gray area. So, it would be wrong to say, well, he's the villain or she's the villain, I mean, even that final act at the end, it's debatable, as crazy as that sounds, and I think that's kind of how the title came about. Paper Tiger is a metaphor for something you think is a tiger and very scary, but it in fact is made of paper. So I wanted the audience to think about, what is the villain here? Who is at blame? I mean, this is a young man who's afflicted with a chemical imbalance in his brain, I mean, that is going to take some attention. It's not his fault. It's society's fault for stigmatizing it. At the same time, the mother is on her own. She's burdened perhaps by whatever beliefs, she was brought up with, and everyone has those things. And I think the biggest antagonist and villain for me is, again, that the lack of communication, the fact that neither of them are talking to each other openly, and that's the real tiger, Otherwise, it's just a bunch of people on this earth running around, and everyone's got their own things they're dealing with,
Yeah, what was your experience shooting? Because if I'm not mistaken, you guys did this in under 3 weeks, I think, maybe.
Yeah, it was. I think it was about 19 days, all in, with maybe one very small pickup day. Well under $1 million. We had guns, obviously, on set. We had miners. We had school stuff. We had rain. We had fire. So I think, obviously, at the beginning, we were shooting for the stars, and we were very ambitious to try and get this kind of a a film done in the time and in the budget, but I don't know. I think we were very lucky. Also had a great producer, Ping Chun Liu, who I met at the American Film Institute, which really helped, obviously, organize this whole project. Actually, the whole crew, most of the above the line, or the cinematographer, the production designer, they're people that I kind of knew through the American Film Institute. So, there was this attitude of they're kind of friends as well as professionals. So they're willing to go the extra mile, whereas maybe, they weren't watching the clock, so to speak, all the time, which I think is essential on films of this scale. Because otherwise, you're just not going to do it. And just to talk a little bit about the cast, it's funny because the young man who played Edward, Alan Trong, he just moved out from Texas. Just kind of following his dream, moving to Hollywood, trying to make it. And I think he'd done a few really interesting short films in Austin. And my manager at the time kind of was representing him, and I had a meeting with him, and he had long hair and a mustache, and I was like, oh, this kid's great, but he's way too old looking. But then he kind of convinced me just with he had something very innocent about him, but very deep, he was very profoundly, like you can tell he had a depth to him. And then he shaved his mustache and cut his hair, and I was like, yes, we're getting closer. So that was, Alan, that was another big part of the project when I found Alan. And then Lydia, ironically, who played Lily, she came in to read from May, who's kind of like the best friend of the mother.
Yeah.
But she was so smart because she was reading in the style of Lily. And I was like, I know what you're doing here. You're playing this in a way that you want me to be like, you're better for Lily. And then I called her back in, and then, eventually we had a chemistry read between Lydia and Alan, excuse me. And it was just there, they kind of felt like mother and son already. And then we had a lot of wigs in the film because obviously Lily develops cancer through the film. So that was also very difficult because we had to literally have hair and makeup do a bald cap for like half of the days, which takes ages. So there was a lot of, like I'm sure you hear all the time in interviews, right? It doesn't matter the budget. It's like, this was a really hard film to make. But I think it kind of, in a way, that resistance and the fact that it was low budget and difficult, it always forces you to make choices because it gives you limitations. I think the films where it's like, you got $100 million, you can use a crane every day. They don't always turn out so great, But if you're like, hey, we have this amount of time to shoot, you're kind of like, okay, well, the camera, we can't do all that stuff. What's the best place to put the camera for one shot? And it kind of forces you to really think creatively in a weird way, almost like a rhyme scheme in poetry, It's like you could do free verse, but wait, I have this sonnet structure, and suddenly like it starts to mean something. So I don't mind shooting quickly. I don't mind shooting in 19 days or to have a limited budget because I know deep down it really helps me be the most creative, if that makes sense. So
yeah, that's probably my favorite part of interviewing people doing indie films is because you learn about some of the limitations. Totally. And how like you said, they got creative with it and made it work. And
I mean, I'll give you one example. There's a scene in the classroom, the science classroom. I think we had 22 setups or something crazy. It was going to be this whole, massive sprawling thing. And somebody knocked over, we were using this projector in the class. I don't know if you remember the scene, but there's some birds being projected in biology class, right? So somebody knocked over the projector, broke the projector, right? Yeah. So suddenly we're about to shoot the scene and we thought, okay, we can't do this now. Let's go do another scene. Somebody ran home to get their own little like LCD projector, brought it back. And because of that, we only had about 5 setups, like maybe an hour to shoot that scene. But ironically, it really helped us focus. And what became like this massive, complicated scene actually was greatly simplified by the fact that someone hit the projector. I think accidents on set are actually not safety accidents, but things where you run out of time or you lose a location or your actor's late or whatever, a light gets knocked over and suddenly forces you to see the scene in a different way. Those are really helpful in a weird way. And I think in the beginning, when I was directing, I was such a perfectionist and a control freak. And I think kind of learning to let go and definitely to prepare, but to show up on set and be like, I'm going to be really present. And if I see something that's better, or if I see something that doesn't go, well in a way, sometimes that can lead you into a different direction that makes you kind of see the scene in a whole different way. I know David Lynch, thinks like that a lot. Like on set, there was even, I think, like one of his crew was in the shot or something, and he didn't see it. And then he saw it later and he's like, no, that's perfect. And then he like ran with it and it was like a common thread in the film or something. So I've really learned that, as Kubrick said, making a film is like riding War and Peace in a bumper car place, And it's like, you just have to let go. And you have to be like, making films is messy. And we're trying to achieve this high poetry, but through chaos, you know? And I think embracing the chaos is the key rather than resisting it. So halfway through the film, I just started doing that and things became a lot easier, you know?
Well, you definitely reached that level, I think, of poetry and commentary,
Awesome.
even
Thank you so
if
much.
it wasn't necessarily on purpose, through a very good story and through very good actors, obviously, like you mentioned, Alan and Lydia. I can't recommend this film enough for people. Thank you so much, Paul, for your time. I
Thank you
appreciate
so
it.
much, Emmanuel. It was a pleasure chatting with you.
Likewise, I appreciate the insight too. That's always a fun part of my conversations.
Cool. Thank you so much.
All right, take care.